So today I'm going to talk about buying an apartment in Brisbane, Perth, Melbourne, or if you want to buy an apartment in beautiful Sydney. And let's say you want to buy an apartment in this beautiful city. And let's say you want to spend between $1 to $2 million for your apartment. Well, you don't want to spend $1 to $2 million, but that's what you're going to have to spend. So you sort of accept that. So there's a couple of ways to do it. And obviously the most common way that most people do it is they look on domain.com.au and realestate.com.au and look at a short list of apartments, and then in most cases run around and look at them themselves. When they see one they like, they're convinced by the selling agent to put an offer in. They put an offer in and they buy a lovely apartment for investment or for their own use permanently or for a holiday place when they visit Sydney. That's the most common way people do it by far, or they have to attend an auction, of course. While it's the most common way, it's not always the best way. And in my experience, the average price paid over the market price is averaging around 10%. So if you're willing to pay that 10%, then quite realistically, you can do that. Doesn't always happen, doesn't mean you won't get a good buy, but the selling agents are naturally very experienced in talking to buyers and creating urgency and letting buyers know that there's massive demand for the apartment and put your best offer in ASAP. That's what they're very good at, and that's what they do very, very well. The other alternative that probably less than 2% of people do, which will give you a little bit of a heads up, is to employ your own buyer's agent to help you in the search and the negotiation and the analysis of the potential apartments you're looking at buying. And in many cases, you can also access off-market properties. To me, there's two advantages in using a buyer's agent when you're buying an apartment in Sydney. And one of the important advantages is that selling agents are very skilled at talking to potential buyers and what we call qualifying them, which you all know about, qualifying their financial position and working out whether they have the means to actually buy a property. And a lot of buyers naturally are reluctant to disclose their financial position to a stranger, a selling agent. However, when you're represented by a buyer's agent, the selling agent takes them very seriously because they know that a buyer's agent has a serious client, a serious buyer that they're representing. And you often get the heads up ahead of time. Plus, because the selling agent's talking to another professional, they tend to be more open and I won't say honest, but certainly more open and disclosing of the seller's motivation, the seller's price expectation, how much interest there is, just in general conversation without revealing anything that would be confidential. But that's when it's professional to professional talking, as opposed to you walking into an open house and you're just one of 20 people looking that particular afternoon. The buyer's agent represents you and will analyze the square meter rate of each apartment, the selling price, will look at all the previous sales. Now, you can, of course, also do that all yourself. But normally, the buying agent's fees, 1% or not much more than 1% of the final price, so way less than even the stamp duty you're going to pay. And you may not have the time to do all that running around for every single apartment that you want to look at and compare. So that is one of the advantages. A second major advantage of using your own buyer's agent is the art of negotiation. Now, you may well be an excellent negotiator in your business, but the fact remains that real estate is a people's business. And yes, I've seen all the courses where you can learn to understand the data, and that's fine if you're buying, well, it could be fine if you're just buying an investment property and you're just relying on the data. But if it's for your own use, or in reality, if it's an investment property, it's also very important to understand the people part of real estate, the human aspect. Real estate is a people's business. It's a human business. There's a buyer and a seller. There's going to be people that are coming in to live in there, and they're going to pay a premium for location, for a view, for the design, for the floor plan, and for the fit out. So no amount of data analysis can take into account that human factor. And of course, one of the problems with real estate is it is an emotional business. So when you're negotiating your own property, a property to live in or to put tenants in and hopefully to make you money over the next 5, 10, 15 and 20 years. A large amount of the interplay is negotiation and emotion with the selling agent and the seller. And unless you're doing it every day, unless you've been doing it for a decade, negotiating deals, buying and selling, and you let the emotional part come in, that alone can cost you a lot of money. When you fall in love with a property and therefore you simply overpay. Everybody knows that. That's what happens when you fall in love with something. You always overpay. We're all the same, human nature. So real estate is always going to be a human business, a human touch, a willing buyer, a willing seller. And if you've got somebody in the middle to negotiate for you, to take away that emotional aspect of overpaying, then that could be well worth quite a lot to you, I believe. The other value add that buyer's agents can bring, especially if they're apartment specialists rather than a general buyer's agent, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but is off-market property. So how does a buyer's agent get off-market properties that you can't get as a potential buyer? Well, it's pretty easy because dealing with agents all day long. Then the agent will ask them, well, what are you looking for? What's your buyer looking for? And using my example earlier, looking for an apartment, 1 to 2 million in great location, a great building that's at market or below market value in Sydney CBD. That's the example I'm using here today because I'm filming this down in obviously Sydney Harbour and the CBD. So we attend an open house, we have a look, we chat to the agent. The agent understands that as a buyer's agent, you've got a client, a serious buyer on your hands. And the next time he is giving a presentation to somebody in a building, he may well say to them, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, beautiful apartment you have here. I value it at 1.5 million. By the way, you may not even have to go to market. I have a potential buyer working through a buyer's agent that is looking for exactly this property. So those properties never get on realestate.com, never get on domain.com.au. Now, there's no guarantee ever that that property that this comes up. As buyer's agents, we get calls from agents all day, every day saying, this is what I've got coming up. Do you have somebody who's looking for that? Or if they know already, they say, I found the perfect property for your client. And then obviously you ring the client, you go and inspect it, and you negotiate a private deal. It saves the seller a ton of anguish, a ton of marketing money. And that's the way the off-market purchasing often works, which, you know, if you're trying to do that yourself, obviously just never ever gonna happen. And just a brief comment on where I'm filming today. Obviously, I'm down at the Opera House. And really, it doesn't matter how many times I come down here, and I've been down here hundreds of times to eat, to drink, to have coffee, to have breakfast, to catch up with friends, and occasionally to do filming like today. So firstly, apologies because I've got the sunglasses on. It's a pretty bright day here in Sydney today, as it often is. Sydney's climate is fantastic. If I was buying an apartment in Sydney right now, I'd look at the secondary market in some of these fabulous buildings. Right behind me, and I'll see if I can zoom in, that smaller white building just behind the ones at the front, Bennelong, what's it called? I can't remember the name, Bennelong Point, I think. Maybe wrong. But the little white building just in behind with the balconies there, that was one of the first inner city apartment buildings done by Mirvac. It was called The Key. And if I remember correctly, I think it was early 80s, maybe even late 70s, but certainly early 80s. And I remember the marketing for it that, you know, it showed traffic jams on the Harbour Bridge. And it said, if you live here, you'd be home by now. And at that time, I remember it very, very well. The apartments were considered extraordinarily expensive. And there was a lot of commentary. Who would ever pay those prices to live in the city centre? The city centre is only for office buildings. It's not for residential. Well, when we look now, we see nothing but magnificent residential and office buildings, of course, here, but a lot of residential buildings intermixed there. And this has become some of the most expensive real estate in Australia, and with good reason. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world. Again, with good reason. Who wouldn't want to live here? I mentioned no matter how many times I come down here, I never, ever, ever get sick of it. It is really just magnificent. That being said, I would buy on the secondary market. You can still get good buys. The new ones are extraordinarily expensive. The price of construction and land prices has pushed them per square meter through the roof. So if you are buying and you want to use an apartment specialist, I would recommend, if you can find a smaller one, a specialist who's going to give you absolutely all the care you deserve when you're buying, spending this kind of money down on Sydney Harbour, then you could definitely consider doing that. I think that would be something well worthwhile. Of course, unashamedly, I will plug my own service, but I'll leave you to make that decision. And of course, the other great place to buy in Sydney always has been, always will be, in my view, behind me, the lower North Shore of Sydney. This is where I had my first 2 Sydney apartments. Well, actually, no, my second and third Sydney apartments. My first one was a studio in King's Cross. So I bought a 2-bedroom apartment in Neutral Bay on top of the hill, looking down at the Opera House. It was absolutely magnificent view. And my dear old mother, who I just visited yesterday as she's turning 97 next week, told me at the time, why would I pay $275,000 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment with a view of the Opera House? She said, it's crazy prices. Well, that shows you how long ago, of course, it was when I started buying in that area. And then another one in Kirribilli, just behind me. Also an old building, that one, and then I refurbished it and turned that into a little gold mine. So this area is always going to be in massive demand. There's obviously high-rise restriction, which is good and bad. Of course, it's good if you're buying, but or you already own, I should say. Not so good if you're trying to buy because there's not much choice, but there is a lot of very old buildings. So you still can get into the market. We've got Kirribilli, Neutral Bay, I think it's called Carraba Bay, I'm not sure about that. Milson's Point on the other side there, behind Luna Park. Got Cremorne Point and Cremorne itself, and obviously Mossman. And there's a lot of variety and choice, everything from buildings from the 60s, some of the 50s still remain, as well as modern high-rise buildings. So there is some good bargains, some good properties to be had in that area too. And it's a short ferry ride in, or a express bus service, or a drive into the city centre. And it's also, of course, close to get up to the northern beaches and not that far from the eastern suburbs. You can hear the noise, I think, behind me. I'm not sure, the ferries, the helicopters. Sydney's a very buzzy, exciting city. And, you know, I love Sydney, and I would really welcome the opportunity of helping anybody who wants to grab an apartment here in Sydney. Although I should say the days of grabbing apartments are long gone. A careful selection, carefully considered apartment for the future.